Hello students. So this week we are going to be working with dyads and triads, which will involve two different types of intervals, melodic intervals and harmonic intervals. What I would like to do is go one by one through these exercises on Jamboard, and as I do that I will explain the definitions of these terms. So, as you can see, we have a treble staff once again, and the letters of the lines and spaces are outlined. The lines have the green letters E, G, B, D, F. Once again, we use Eddie's green boots don't fit to remember that. And for the letters of the spaces, we have the word face spelled out, F-A-C-E. Once again, when you do your Jamboard assignment this week, these letters will not be there. These letters are just here now for the purpose of demonstrating. After you put your name on top, you can start with number 1. Number 1 asks you to create a melodic interval of a third starting on D. Now, first of all, we need to remember what the word interval means. In music, an interval is an amount of space between two notes. Okay? So there's large intervals that are wide, meaning there's lots of space in between, and then there's smaller intervals that are not as wide, narrower intervals, where there's less space in between. And in general, we're going to be working with narrower intervals in this assignment, okay? Now, we learned last week about some different kinds of intervals. There's steps, and then there's skips, and then there's leaps. And I told you that a step is a second, whereas a skip would be a third, and a leap would be anything greater than a third, right? Now, this week we're going to get more specific with intervals. There are two main categories of intervals, and then we measure the intervals after we determine the category. So, what is a melodic interval? The word melodic derives from the word melody, and you hear a melody when you hear notes being played one at a time. So, for example, Mary Had a Little Lamb, that's a melody because when I whistle that melody, you're only hearing one note at a time. I'm not whistling two notes at a time. Now, there are some people who are very talented who can do that. People who can whistle or sing two notes at a time. Maybe you can figure out how to do that. But for the most part, when you whistle or you sing, you perform one note at a time, which is a melody. Think of playing a piano. If you played a theme by pressing one key at a time, that would be considered a melody. Now, if you play more than one key at a time, like if you play 2 or 3 keys at a time, that's not a melody. Okay? That would be considered harmony. That's the word that harmonic derives from. Okay? But let's focus on number 1. We're going to create a melodic interval. That means we're going to have two notes that are a certain interval apart, one after the other. Okay? So that means they're not going to be played at the same time. They're going to be played one at a time. Okay? So let's start by figuring out where we're going to start our first note. Number 1 says starting on D. So we know that we find D by asking ourselves, does D belong in the word face? And the answer is no. Okay? So then we ask ourselves, does D belong in the acronym Eddie's green boots don't fit? And the answer is yes, because the word don't starts with the letter D, and that's on the 4th line. So we're going to click and drag our first note onto the D line, the 4th line of the staff. And now we want to create a melodic interval of a third. Now, if you were paying attention earlier in this video, I told you that a skip is a third. So if you memorize that, then this is simple. You just need to create a skip. Now, this is what a skip looks like, because we would be skipping over this space to get from the first note to the next note. So we're going from a line to a line by skipping over this space. Now, if you want to be absolutely sure that it's a third, you have to count the first note as 1, count the next space as 2. If the note is on that space, then you're done. But since it's not on that space, we're not done, so we keep going. When we get to the next line, we count 3. Is the note on that line? Yes, so that's where we stop. What number did we stop on? 3. So that means our interval is a third. Now, this is a melodic third because the second note comes after the first note. Each note is played one at a time because just like when you read a book, you read one word at a time, starting from the left and moving to the right. You don't read all the words at the same time. You can't speak them all at the same time. So you read the first word, and then your eyes move to the second word, and you read the second word. Okay? Music is the same way. We read the first note, and then we move our eyes to the next note, and we perform the second note. Okay? So these notes are to be played one at a time because they are not on top of each other like this. They are one after the other, like that. So therefore, that is a melodic interval of a third. Okay, moving right along to number 2. Number 2 asks us to create a dyad with a harmonic interval of a fourth, starting on G. So now, this is loaded because we have some new terminology here. We have to figure out what a dyad is and what a harmonic interval is. Now, a dyad is simply 2 notes that are played at the same time. And it's always 2 notes. It's not more than 2. It's not fewer than 2. A dyad always involves 2 notes being performed at the same time. So if you can imagine yourself walking up to a piano and pressing 2 keys at the same exact time, that would be you performing a dyad. Okay? Now, because the notes are being performed at the same time, we would need to place the notes on top of each other like this. And that whenever you see 2 or more notes stacked on top of each other like that, that means you have to play them at the same time. And remember earlier I said when you play or perform music notes at the same time, that's an example of harmony, not melody. Therefore, this type of interval will be a harmonic interval. Okay? So let's start on G. So we have to find G. Is G in the word face? Nope. So that means G is not going to be on a space. Is G found in the acronym Eddie's green boots don't fit? Yes, it is, because green starts with G, and that's on the second line. So we're going to drag our note onto the second line. All right? Now, we need to create a harmonic interval of a fourth. Okay? So we have to count 4 steps from G. 4 steps from G. So we first count G as 1. Then we move up to the next space, which is a step up, and we count 2. We're not at 4 yet, so we're going to keep going up to the next line. That would be the 3rd step, okay? We're not at 4 yet, so we have to keep going. Now we move up to this space here. That would be the 4th step. And we have reached the number 4 because we're working with an interval of a fourth. So I want to drag this second note up to this space here, which is 4 steps away from G. And I'm going to double check right now. I'm going to count G as 1. Next step is 2. Next step is 3. Next step is 4. And there we go. Notice how this note is directly on top of G. It's not over here. It's not over there. It's right on top of him. That's what makes this a harmonic interval of a fourth. Okay? And because you're playing 2 notes at the same time, it's also called a dyad. All right. Now, moving right along to number 3. We are going to create a triad with a harmonic interval of a third, followed by a third, starting on B. So this is a little more complicated now. We're going to be dealing with more than 1 harmonic interval in this example. We're going to be dealing with 2 harmonic intervals. So first of all, what is a triad? A triad is when we play, you guessed it, 3 notes at a time. So if you walk up to a piano and you take 3 fingers and you press and hold down 3 keys at the same time, that is you performing a triad. Okay? Most forms of harmony in music involve triads. Most of the songs you hear on the radio have many triads. So we are going to have to drag these three notes to certain locations and make sure that they are all vertically stacked like this because, again, we're dealing with harmonic intervals. And by the way, triads are always harmonic. They are always stacked like this. Okay? When they're not stacked like this, there's a different name for them, which we'll get to next. Okay? So we want to start on B. So is B in the word face? Nope. So B would not be found on the spaces. We do see that B is found on the lines, on the third lines. Eddie's green boots. Boots starts with B. So let's drag our first note onto the B line. Okay. Now, we are now supposed to create a harmonic interval of a third. So, by the way, when you're creating these harmonic intervals, or generally speaking, even with melodic intervals, I always want you to move up the staff. So I don't want you to count 3 going down or 4 going down. I always want you to count up, whether it's melodic or harmonic. Okay? So we're starting on B. Now we're going to have to figure out a harmonic interval of a third from B. So let's count 1 on B, move up to the next space. That's 1 step higher. So now we're on count 2. Okay, are we at the number 3 yet? No, so we're going to move up 1 more step to this line, and we're going to count the number 3. Have we reached the number 3 yet? Yes, we have. So that is where we're going to put our next note to create a harmonic interval of a third. There we go. So now this harmonic interval sort of resembles a skip, right? Because we're skipping this space to get to that line. Okay, so now our next step is to create another harmonic interval of a third because it says followed by a third. We're creating a triad with a harmonic interval of a third followed by a third. So we have to create another third from where we left off. We left off on the D line. So let's count another 3 steps from D, starting with D. So D is 1. We move up to the next step, this space, and we count 2. Then we move up to this top line and we count 3. Since we reached the number 3, that is where we're going to put our final note to create our additional harmonic interval of a third. So now we have a harmonic interval of a third between these 2 notes and a harmonic interval of a third between these 2 notes. And if you're really paying attention, you'll notice that there's another harmonic interval built into this triad. If you count from the first note up to the third note, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a harmonic interval of a fifth. From B to F, that's a fifth. So we have a third, followed by a third, and you would think that would add up to 6, but it actually, in this case, adds up to a fifth. All right, now for number 4, we're going to create an arpeggio, there's a fancy word, with a melodic interval, notice how it says melodic now, of a third, followed by a third, similar as before, and this time we're starting on F. Okay, so is F found in the word face? Yes, it is, right here. Is F also found in Eddie's green boots don't fit? Why, yes, it is. So which F should we start on? Well, remember I told you that we should always count upwards in these exercises. So if we start on the top F, we're going to end up in outer space up here. So let's start on the lower F. This is where our first note will go. Now, arpeggio sounds like a pretty fancy word, doesn't it? So should we be concerned? No, because arpeggio is simply an Italian word, and all it is similar to a triad. It involves 3 notes, but instead of being played at the same time, they're played one at a time. So if we were to, for example, slide this note over and slide that note over, that would be considered an arpeggio because we're playing each note one at a time instead of at the same time. If we stack them on top of each other, though, this is considered a triad, not an arpeggio. All right. So basically an arpeggio is just a triad, but instead of playing them all at the same time and stacking them on top of each other, we play them one at a time by pulling them apart. So we started on F. Now we need to create a melodic interval of a third from F. So we're going to count 3 from F, starting with F. F is 1. Next step up here on this line is 2. And the next step above that line is 3. So we're going to put our next note in that space because that's a third from F. Okay? Followed by a third. So we're going to create another melodic interval of a third from A. So let's start with A, counting 1, moving to the next step. This line, counting 2, moving to the next space, counting 3. There's another third. Another melodic third. And here we have an arpeggio. If we were to stack them on top of each other, that would be a triad. Okay, they would be played at the same time. But arpeggios are not 3 notes played at the same time. They are 3 or more notes played one after the other. But it's important to understand that an arpeggio outlines a triad. So arpeggios and triads are related. They're like cousins. So you wouldn't just put the notes anywhere you want and call that an arpeggio. This is not an arpeggio because it doesn't resemble a triad when you put it together, okay? It looks too complicated when you do that. That, however, is an arpeggio. It looks like it outlines a triad. All right? So now, when you do your homework this week, when you do your assignment this week, these letters will not be here once again. So if you need to watch this video one more time to remember where the letters of the staff belong, then please do. And also, I'm going to slightly change up these letters and directions for numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm not going to change it too much. So if you watched this entire video, you should have no problem with this week's assignment. I'm just going to change it up a little bit so that you can figure it out on your own. Don't forget to submit your Jamboard to me on Google Classroom when you're finished. And please, once again, do not submit a Jamboard to me that's incomplete, because then I'm just going to send it back to you and ask you to complete it. Make sure you finish the assignment after watching this entire video, and then submit your Jamboard on Google Classroom. Okay? If you have any questions, please send me a private comment or an email, and I look forward to helping you this week. Take care.